Hello, friends. How are you? Can you hear me, guy? Can you hear me all right? Hey, guys. Let me know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to do a bit of live streaming, and I'm going to do a little bit of drawing as well, because, I like to draw, and I figured that this is a thing that cool YouTube streamers do, which is draw while talking. Okay, that's pretty cool. So, unfortunately, when I'm drawing, it means that I won't be able to respond quite as much if you guys are asking me questions. So that will be a little bit unfortunate, but hopefully, hopefully you guys will enjoy the drawing part of things. What I'm doing is that I'm working on a graphic, a big graphic, as you can see here. I'll show you. I've been making these little graphics of different pictures that represent different videos that I've made in the past. And so what I'm going to do is I'm eventually going to make a new sort of graphic for the title card of my YouTube channel. And if you look at these little drawings that I've made, each one of them represents a different video that I've done. And I've done over 150 or 60 videos at this point. So I'm hoping kind of to have a little collectible image for each one, which I think is kind of be a bit of a fun thing. Ooh. There we go. The screen is flickering a little bit, isn't it? I wonder how I can stop that from happening. If I turn this off, does that help? Man, still a lot of flicker. That kind of sucks. It's annoying. I want to draw, but I don't want it to flicker non-stop. That's kind of obnoxious, don't you think? Hold on a second. Let me try to use some... I just brought a brand new computer, so I'm expecting it to be a higher quality production than this. The problem is that because I have this new computer, I have to get all of the new chords for it. Hold on a sec, let me try, because of course Mac makes it so that every time you buy a new computer you have to throw out every chord you've previously owned and buy a whole bunch of new ones. Hold on a second, let me try something here. I'm gonna try unplugging it from here, and that's gonna turn off the screen. And then I'll try plugging it in here instead. Boop. Somebody's calling me on my ear-splitting ringtone, as I'm sure you heard. Hello, Khaled. My friend Josh is trying to talk to me, but I can't talk to him because I'm live streaming. 21st century problems. Do you guys know what the ringtone was? Oh, hey, Paul. Paul just graduated high school. That's pretty awesome. Right now it is 8:45 in my dimension. I was hoping that this would work a little bit better than it is. It's flickering pretty bad, eh? I'm using OBS to stream in response to somebody who asked that. OBS has been pretty good. I've used it for all of my streamings in the past, so I haven't really had a big problem with it. But the flicker is a little bit annoying, I must say. Am I doing this right here? Okay, you guys are going to learn some interesting stuff about the way I draw, which is that I tend to do this a lot. I tend to try again and again to get the perfect line until I do it correctly, which is very difficult, particularly when it comes to drawing eyeballs. Whoops. You can see my my desktop there for a second. All right, that's not so bad. No, that's too big. My friend asks me, do I think Justin Trudeau can win? And yes, I absolutely do. And in fact, I more than I think that he can win, I think actually that he will win. So, you know, Trudeau is getting a lot of bad press right now, which is too bad for him. But you know, I think that when push comes to shove, it is still vastly more likely that a first-term prime minister will win a second term than that he won't. It's not bad. Yes, this is, I am drawing Donkey Kong, by the way, for those who asked. No, that's not so great. I love Donkey Kong. It's my favorite video game for the SNES. Not Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong Country 3 is my favorite SNES game. What's a melter? Whoops. I think Donkey Kong Country 3 I generally like third games in a series because I think that by the time you're on game number 3, you've really perfected the franchise. Donkey Kong Country 3, the gameplay is so excellent. All of the levels are so well designed. What does my friend say? Would the next Canadian Parliament be a minority? I think that's very possible that that could happen. Actually, do I think that? I don't know if I actually do think that or not. I think that... let me think if I can multitask here. Minority parliaments usually happen when the NDP does very well, because obviously for there to be a minority parliament, you have to have a party other than just the Liberals and Conservatives performing well. And I don't think that there's much sign that the NDP is going to perform particularly well in this election. You know, the Quebecers will never vote for Jagmeet Singh for reasons. And so as a result, I think that it seems reasonably plausible to expect that that it will just be another Liberal majority. Okay, I'm getting some paid questions here, so I have to answer these. What do you think about Pakistan? I think that Pakistan is kind of a tragic country. I've been reading actually a little bit about Pakistan recently, the history of the country, the context in which it was founded. You know, I'm very critical of countries that exist only to sort of be the anti-something else country. And, you know, Pakistan, I think, is very obviously exists just to be sort of the anti-India. So not a big fan of that. And I think the Pakistanis have struggled to have a nationalism that is independent of being anti-India and being a sort of Islamic identity. And I think that they've had a lot of trouble as a result of that. My other friend says outside of Edmonton and Calgary, which is more conservative. Obviously, Calgary is much more conservative than Edmonton. Edmonton voted 100% NDP in the last provincial election. It's basically the most left-wing part of Alberta. Should I try all dressed chips, says my friend Joseph. I would recommend not. I find them to be quite gross. Even though I've noticed that they're being advertised a lot in America these days as the authentic taste of Canada. My friend is asking me what I think of New Zealand, and I think New Zealand has some of the same problems as this sounds very unflattering to New Zealand, but some of the same issues as Pakistan, or I suppose you could say as Canada. It's another country that I think defines itself in a large part by being the non-Australia. Although the New Zealanders, I notice, have really gotten a lot of national identity out of the Maori sort of fact these days. They derive a lot of purpose out of the idea that they're a very sort of indigenousified country. People are always asking me, what do you think of my country? What do you think of this country? Devin asks me where in Metro Vancouver I'm from. I'm actually from Vancouver proper, which is unusual. I was born in Vancouver in 1984. That's not so bad. My friend's asking me about chips. All-dressed chips. All-dressed chips actually aren't that bad. I'll eat them if there's nothing better. But there's so many better kinds of chips, you know? I like barbecue and sour cream and onion. And actually, I'm a big fan of just plain, you know, salt-based chips because as any of my friends could tell you, I'm a big fan of salt. Salt and vinegar is good as well. Do you like Pringles chips better than the bag chips? In Canada, we of course have a very popular brand of chip called Old Dutch. Actually, does that exist in America too? I don't even know anymore. It's so hard to tell what's a Canadian thing and what's an American thing. It's all sort of blobs together. I've never been to Vancouver, Washington. You know, Vancouver, Washington actually came before Vancouver, British Columbia. A lot of people don't know that. They assume that the more famous one came first. I don't know if I like how those teeth look. They seem a bit crooked. Whoops. My thoughts on the Indian election? Well, you know, I did make a whole video on the subject. Actually, no, I guess I didn't. I made a video on the lead up to the election. I feel like in the video I talked about how it was likely that, you know, Mr. Modi was going to win, and he did. So I suppose I'm vindicated by that. I mean, I don't think it's... I really don't think it's unreasonable for any group of voters to give a government a second chance, you know? Like, I think that it is a bit unreasonable to expect huge changes to have happened in just 4 years. So when people want to give a government another chance, I don't think that that's an irrational thing to do. Is UVic a good university or respected in Canada? So my friend is asking me about the University of Victoria. I would say it is a good university, yeah. I know a lot of people that have gone there over the years. I often meet people that have gone there. I think it's relatively respected. I mean, Canada's an interesting country in that it doesn't really have a university hierarchy like a lot of other countries do. I don't really feel like, and maybe this is just my bias because I'm from the West, but I really don't feel like that there's kind of an understood, you know, the good university or the bad university or this kind. Well, I mean, obviously there's bad universities in the sense that there's like, you know, the small ones in the unpopular provinces, but I don't think that people judge. Like, I certainly don't think that there's, like, one, like, there's no, like, Canadian Harvard. Like, there's no university where you say you went there and everybody's like, oh my. So in that sense, it's a very sort of democratic university culture, which I think is good. You know, I went to the University of Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, BC. And, you know, I've never felt bad about that. I've never felt like that there's any way better place that I could have gone instead. Someone is calling me. Hello? Oh, hey Graham, how are you? Oh, I'm just doing a live stream on YouTube right now, so I'll have to call you back. Yeah. You are. You're a... Well, they can hear me talking to you. You're not a character in it. All right. I'll talk to you in a bit, all right? Okay, see ya. That was my friend Graham. He is a writer for the Toronto Sun, popular Canadian newspaper out here. All of my journalistic buddies. I don't like how that eyeball is touching his nose. I'm going to redraw that. My gram is in my grandma? No way. All my grandmothers are dead, I'm sorry to say. I'm too old to have living grandparents. Jacob says, hello. Hello, Jacob, how are you? Okay, we're going to move the nose down here. I'm from California, and I'm going to be moving to Quebec next year. That's a big leap. Are you moving to Quebec because you're going to go to school there? You know, we were talking earlier before about, good Canadian schools and that kind of thing. A sort of joke in Canada is that Americans love to go to school in Quebec for some reason. So McGill University in Montreal is like the school that all of the Americans go to. I think it's because Americans are just really fascinated by Quebec, and it seems like the most interesting part of Canada, which I guess makes sense. I mean, if you're an American that's going to go to university in Canada, you may as well go to an exotic part of the country and not just, some America Junior part of the country. That's pretty good. Someone was talking about Israel. They're going to have emergency elections, which is pretty wild. I can't think of another time in recent history of democracies that they've had two back-to-back elections like that. That would be an interesting video, actually. Would be most elections in a row. You know, the election that Hitler won, I think, was one of those kind of elections where they just had a vote 4 months ago or something, and then they have another election. I think in Canada the closest elections were 8 months apart. When Joe Clark was prime minister, and then his governing coalition sort of fell apart. That's not a bad Donkey Kong, I think. I need to get the colors from the other one. I've been using the same palette of colors, so I'm just going to copy and paste these. How do I do that? Copy, there we go. Should the US and Canada have a passport union? Yes. Canada and America should have every sort of union, in my opinion. Because I'm a continental integrationist. We can either hang alone or we can hang together. What is this? I don't know what that is. Alright. Oh, there's some sort of weird little bit here. What is this? Alright. Now we'll do some coloring. Do. People are asking a lot of weird and repetitive questions, I'm afraid. So my friend is asking me, how is it that you can have elections that are only 8 months apart? Well, in a parliamentary system, the way it usually works is that you have an election, and then the prime minister has to be usually elected by the parliament. And sometimes the parliament cannot decide on who they want the prime minister to be. And in some countries, they have a deadline. In Israel, they have a deadline. So in Israel, the deadline was today. They had to, the parliament had to elect a prime minister by midnight of today. That is my understanding. And when they didn't, in order to prevent the country from just going into this protracted state of paralysis forever, the parliament has to be dissolved. So basically they say the parliament doesn't work anymore and it has to be dissolved, and then they go to the voters, and the voters elect a new parliament that will presumably be able to elect a prime minister a little bit easier. I mean, I think that this is a somewhat questionable philosophy of government, because it sort of implies that it is the voters' fault for the fact that the politicians can't sort of get their act together. I mean, in theory, you could just have elections forever, and the politicians could never decide. And I mean, like, that was, that was part of what led to Hitler's rise to power as well, was that the German parliament could not settle on who should be the ruler of that country, and blah blah blah. There was a lot of wrangling back and forth. I mean, in an American context, it would be sort of like, I mean, America doesn't usually have problems like this, although it could in theory, because if, like, you could imagine, like, because in America, like, the equivalent of the prime minister is the Speaker of the House, right? And because it's a two-party system, it is relatively easy to elect a Speaker of the House, in theory, although you could imagine it being very difficult if there was, like, some sort of radical right or left-wing faction of one of the two major parties that was sort of holding the process hostage. And there's always been a bit of fear that this will happen one day. And then, that the Congress would have to keep voting forever to try to elect a speaker that would be palatable to the majority if the majority was really divided. But, of course, in the American system, there is no escape hatch. There is no emergency elections. Mostly because in America, the elections happen every 2 years. So, like, it's not the end of the world, I think, to wait that long. You could imagine, if there was, like, a protracted inability to elect a speaker, that you could imagine it going on for 2 years and there being no congressional action for 2 years. Alright, it's Donkey Kong. Not bad. My boy JJ. My boy, my dude. All the cool young people say, my guy now. My guy, they say. Okay. Whoops. This is too wide. I need to make this a little bit thinner. I'm going to do this a little bit more differently. Actually, no. Hold on. Whoops. There we go. Wait a second. I often screw this up. Oh good, I'm not. Sometimes I draw on the blue layer. You think people still like Ronald Reagan? I feel like a lot of people don't really remember much about him today. Well, I mean, more and more people are getting to the age where you know, he's sort of somebody that you read about in the history books. He was the president when I was born, but, you know, I was too young to remember anything. I used to love to draw political cartoons, but unfortunately, there is not much demand for them these days. Sorry, you guys are seeing my text messages. Sorry if I'm not answering your questions. It's hard to look at the drawing and the thing at the same time. The app that I'm using to draw, I'm using the app Procreate. Which is a really good app for drawing. I use it increasingly to I saw somebody asks if I could do another travel video, where would I want to go to next? And that's easy. I want to go to South Africa next. I'm hoping that maybe in 2020 I'll have a chance to go to South Africa. It's sort of the last, not the last, but it's certainly one of the major countries I've been wanting to visit for a long time. What do I think about the Australian election, somebody asks me. I don't think too much. I mean, I honestly didn't follow it very closely. I mean, all I know is what I read in the papers, which was that it was a big, shocking upset. Procreate is amazing, says Nicholas. It sure is. Do I have a country on the avoid list? It's a good question. I mean, I definitely feel like I don't want to go back to Ireland anytime soon. I mean, I shouldn't say that. That's very mean. I had a fun time in Ireland, but I mean, you know, I don't want to go back there again. Certainly, I feel like the Irish. That's, I think, one of my most controversial videos, and it still kind of baffles me to some degree that that video was as controversial as it was. You know, the Irish. Sensitive, I think, is the word that I would use, maybe. I'd like to do a video on, like, I mean, this would be a very controversial video, but like a video on, like, who are the most sensitive countries in the world? Who get triggered the easiest? I mean, you know, I come from Canada, and Canada is a very sensitive and easily triggered country, and that's one of the things I don't like about Canada. And as a result, when I travel, when a country seems to have sort of dysfunctions that remind me of Canadian dysfunctions, that's a big turn off for me. You know, the Irish care a lot about not being British, and I find that kind of obnoxious and not very attractive. But you know, some people, including a lot of Canadians, really like when countries have these kind of anxieties because it reminds them of the anxieties of their own country. The easily triggered countries seem to be the smaller neighbors of larger, overshadowing countries. I think that is a very accurate statement. This color is too light. I need to give him a darker skin. You know, before Donald Trump came along, Ronald Reagan was sort of considered the orange president. Because of course he was a Hollywood actor. He had this sort of Hollywood tan. Someone is asking me about the taxpayer-funded drug facilities. I'm not a fan of those, but I'm not a fan of drug use in general, so... Is ketchup chips a thing? Says my friend. Yes, ketchup chips are a thing in Canada. It's one of these sort of things that Canadians obsess over because it's something that the Americans don't have. Therefore, it must be good, or at least must be special. Whenever I go to the States, I often bring ketchup chips for the folks that I'm going to visit. I'm going to LA in a couple weeks for VidCon. So maybe I'll get a video out of that. I'm sure I will. I have no idea what VidCon is going to be like, so... My friend says he knew it was Ronald Reagan as soon as he popped in. Well, I'm glad that my Reagan is recognizable. I mean, all presidents are easy to draw because, you know, they've hung around so long and they've been drawn so many times that they sort of become these sort of living caricatures by the end. Ronald Reagan was so hated by the time that he left, no, not by the time that he left office. What I meant to say was that he was so hated among the left-wingers and the Europeans in particular. There was famously a poll that they did during the height of the Reagan presidency in Europe. And they asked the Europeans, who was the most evil person that ever lived? And Ronald Reagan actually outranked Hitler. So... as much as people remember Ronald Reagan as being this kind of, you know, jovial guy today, at one time he was seen as this, you know, people thought he was this crazy, senile old lunatic who was going to start World War III, or at least left-wing Europeans did. So when people say things like, you know, oh, you know, America has never been less respected than it is now, and blah, 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 you know, to some extent that these attitudes are always present. Who do you think does the best Trump caricature? Asks Nicholas. That's a good question. I think that I don't know. That is a good question. The Trump in the Washington Post by Tom Tolles is pretty funny. The Trump that the other Washington Post cartoonist Ann Tamell draws is pretty grotesque. I think that it's very clear that she just hates Trump so much that she depicts him according to her political views, not according to his appearance. Because I mean, I think Trump is kind of a weird-looking guy, but he's not quite as grotesque as she draws him as being. There was always a lot of joking at the time about Reagan dyeing his hair because it was too robust for a man of his age. There's a joke about that in The Simpsons where it's like all of the headlines are very sensationalized, and, you know, Kent Brockman is like, "This just in, President Ronald Reagan dyes his hair." Oh, damn. There was jokes about Reagan's hair rusting and all of this kind of thing as well. I actually haven't seen the Simpsons Go to Canada episode, unfortunately. I really should see it. The Simpsons have been to Canada so many times, though. It's not really that interesting to me anymore. I mean, I still love The Simpsons, and I will watch the episode eventually. But, you know, people are like, OMG, you know, The Simpsons went to Canada. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. And it's like, The Simpsons have been to Canada for like 5 or 6 times at this point. But anyway, there's my Ronald Reagan. There's my Donkey Kong. 2 of our friends from the 1980s, I guess. It's been fun live streaming with you guys, but I think I'm going to call it a night. I have to call Graham back and talk to some of my friends, and I want to go for a walk before night. But I'm hoping to do a little bit more live streaming in the future, so good night, my friends, and I will see you all soon. I've got a good video coming out on Saturday I'm actually quite excited about, so stay tuned for that.